Hello, anatomy students. We're going to continue talking about the appendicular skeleton. We're talking about the lower extremities today, and we're going to start in this video talking about just the femur. So this is the anterior view of our skeleton, and the bone that we're talking about is the femur, and that forms the thigh. This is the largest and the strongest bone in our body, and rightly so, because as you can see, it has to support the weight of all of the bones and the organs that are found in our upper body. So it needs to be a very strong bone. You can see that the femur has a very characteristic shape, and one of its distinguishing features is this large, rounded head, which articulates with the acetabulum on the coxal bone. So as you can see, in order for the head to articulate with the coxal bone, it must be on the medial aspect of the bone. So just like the humerus, where the head is always medial, the head always marks the medial side of the femur bone. On the lateral side, the femur has this characteristic horn, which we'll name later. So you should be able to look at a bone and know whether it's a femur or not. But this is its placement here on the leg. And then the other thing that I just want to mention while we're taking a look at this view of the skeleton is our kneecap, called the patella, is going to be connected by ligaments so that it sits right on the anterior aspect of the femur bone. So those are the things that I would like you to keep in mind as we continue with this video. Right, so let's look at the structures that I have listed on your appendicular skeleton practical list of structures. And as I said, this is the femur. Up here at the proximal end, you can see that characteristic rounded head. And here is that horn that you can see as well. Now, this is the anterior view of the femur. And the reason why I know that this is anterior is by looking at two different places. If I look at the very top part at the proximal end, it looks pretty smooth here. And then if I look at the distal end, I have a flattened surface here on the front. This surface is called the patellar surface. This is where the kneecap is going to kind of nestle itself into this little dip of bone here, but it's this flattened part that's called the patellar surface. All right, so let's take a closer look at the head of the femur. Now, if you turn the head, there is a flattened part, and this is not real bone. This is a model. So here, this little hole is where the screw was attaching it to the rest of the model skeleton. But there's a flattened portion right here, and maybe you could see it better if I turn it. There it is, this flattened portion here. This is called the fovea capitis. The fovea capitis. And this is the place where a ligament extends from the acetabulum to the head of the femur in order to hold it in place to form the hip joint, to form that. So it's going to hold the head of the femur in the socket of the acetabulum. So this flattened area that is on the head of the femur is called the fovea capitis. This narrowed collar of bone is called the neck. It attaches the head to the diaphysis of the bone. Now, we're going to travel down towards the distal end of the bone. And we have a medial epicondyle. And we have a lateral epicondyle. And recall from our video on the humerus that the epicondyles simply mean epi above the condyle, which is a bump. So this is simply a bump that is above the condyle. And I'll show you the condyles in a minute because those are on the posterior aspect. But how do I know that this is the medial epicondyle? Well, if I look at the whole picture of my femur, here's the head. The head is always medial, and the epicondyle that's on the same side as the head is also medial. The opposite side, the bump that's opposite to where the head is, that's called the lateral epicondyle. And then, of course, in between those, you have this flattened surface where the patella fits, and this is called the patellar surface. And actually, I can show you that right now. So this is the model of the patella, the kneecap. The widened portion at the very top here, this is called the base of the patella. And then this pointy part is called the apex. The apex is going to point inferiorly. The anterior surface of our patella bows out a little bit, while the posterior surface of our patella has these concave little ditches that are going to accommodate the bumps that we have on the front of our femur. So here we have the patellar surface, which is flat, and then in between we have these bumps which fit into the concave depressions that are found on the posterior aspect of our patella. So here's the anterior aspect, and it fits in just like so. I think if I take my fingers away, it's going to fall off. But that's how it fits. And I just wanted to also show you, see how it fits in perfectly when we look from the top? So that's what I mean. Like the bumps that are found on the femur are going to match exactly with the concave depressions that are found on the posterior aspect of the patella. Now, of course, those all have names, but you are not responsible for those names. Okay, so those are the landmarks that are on the anterior aspect of the femur. Let's flip this femur over so that we can take a look at the posterior aspects of the femur. So once again, just to orient you, proximal end, distal end. At the proximal end of the femur, we have the large rounded head, and here you can really see the narrowed area, which is called the neck. And then we have these two bumps right here, which are going to help to attach. These are the attachment points for tendons for the thigh muscles. And they're pretty large. I mean, there's a very large ditch right here that these two projections form. The projection that kind of sits superiorly and laterally to the head, this is called the greater trochanter. The greater trochanter. The bump that sits inferiorly to the head and is on the medial aspect, because look at it's on the same side of the bone as the head is. This is the lesser trochanter. And this ridge of bone that connects them is called the intertrochantic crest. So a crest of bone is simply a ridge, and it's intertrochantic. That prefix inter means between, and then trochantic refers to the trochanters. So the intertrochantic crest runs between the two trochanters. So once again, the head, the neck, the greater trochanter, the lesser trochanter, and the intertrochantic crest. Now we're going to move to the distal portion of our femur, and I think the thing that strikes you first is that you have these two very large bumps. These two large bumps are called the condyles. They are going to form the knee joint. So they will articulate with the tibia, a bone of the lower leg, in order to form the knee joint along with the patella. So let me put the bone down so that you can see it in full. And so again, this is another way that you can tell that you're looking at the posterior aspect of the bone, right? You have the two trochanters on the posterior aspect, but you don't have them on the anterior aspect. You can see the lesser trochanter peeking out just a little bit there. On the posterior aspect, you have the two condyles at the distal end with this large ditch called the intercondylar fossa in between them, but you do not have those structures on the anterior surface. What you've got on the anterior surface is this flattened area that's called the patellar surface, where the kneecap or the patella is going to fit right in. Okay, so more on this part of the bone then. So once again, the head is always medial. So that means that everything on this side of the bone is medial, including the medial condyle. So where the probe is, this is the medial condyle. This is the lateral condyle because it's on the side of the bone that is opposite to the head. And then in between, you have the intercondylar fossa. So it's a fossa because it's a ditch, and you've heard that word before. Fossas are ditches. And it's intercondylar, which means between the condyles. So I just wanted to point something else out. When we looked at the anterior aspect of the femur, we talked about the medial and the lateral epicondyles. Well, those are the bumps that are above. So these are the epicondyles, medial and lateral, and they are above the condyles, the medial condyle and the lateral condyle. And then, as I mentioned, the intercondylar fossa does not extend to the anterior aspect. Instead, it stops and forms this patellar surface, where our patella fits in like so. All right, that's it for the femur and the patella. I'm going to stop this video and then I will continue on with the leg and the foot. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.